Hey guys, tonight we stand in a sea of cloak-clad pilgrims under a blazing Provençal sun, listening to church bells echo over the hills of France. Dust clings to your leather boots and a whiff of incense drifts on the breeze, promising both salvation and sweat. The heat beats down as vendors hawk fragrant spices, and you feel the weight of centuries pressing on your shoulders. You probably won't survive this without a few blisters on your feet or a bruised ego, but that's part of the charm tucked into your travel pouch. The murmur of vows and the clang of armor linger in the air like a promise wrapped in smoke. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments so we can chart our journey across time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean into the swirl of conversation as Europe convulses under feudal rivalries and a thirst for expansion. Thanks to the medieval agricultural revolution, 11th century harvests have swelled, pushing the continent's population toward an estimated 50 million souls, all competing for land and status. Peasants grumble about tithes, while younger sons of minor nobles jostle for any scrap of territory. Some knights clip dried frog hearts to their surcoats as talismans, convinced the charm wards off exhaustion on the march. Historians still argue whether territorial ambition or spiritual fervor was the primary impulse for the campaign. On November 27, 1095, you press through a crowd packed into the fields outside Clermont, where Pope Urban II mounts a hastily erected wooden platform. He fixes you with a piercing gaze and invites you to imagine sightless Christians in the East, beseeching aid against Muslim rule. Urban's voice rises, promising remission of sins for every soul who takes up the cross on Main Stream. Pledge that echoes through every valley. You can almost taste the zeal in the air. Scribes gossip afterward that he waved a fragment of what they claim is the true cross to stir hearts, though modern scholars sniff at such embellish. As you squint against the glare, you sense nobles shifting uneasily in male and peasants gripping rosary beads fashioned from wood chips. A local chronicler later whispers that Bishop Adhemar delivered a healing sermon so moving it left half the crowd in tears, but some question if the speaker's voice wasn't aided by an acoustic trick with hidden amphora. Around you, murmurs of familial debts paid off by a crusader's ransom mingle with vows of divine reward. You can't help but smirk a little, because nothing says spiritual epiphany like risking dysentery for the promise of treasure. Finally, a hush falls as Urban utters the words you've waited for. Deus vult, God wills it. The cry ripples across the assembly like a blade's edge, slicing through doubt. You feel your pulse quicken, imagining gilded Jerusalem brimming with relics and riches. And in that moment, the enormity of leaving home hits you. Your mother's warning about scorpions. Your neighbor's tale of a cousin swallowed by quicksand. In Asia Minor, you press your fingers into the rough linen of your tunic, fastening the red cross over your heart. Sweat trickles down, mingling with the dusty patina of fear and excitement. Somewhere close, someone unwraps a chunk of crocodile dung, slathering it like a modern sunscreen, an odd remedy you'll avoid, but can't forget. With dawn still hours away, you join a ragged wave of pilgrims spilling down the hillside toward the rendezvous point. Horses whinny in the distance and campfires bloom like constellations on the dark fields. As you trudge after strangers who might become friends or foes, you whisper a silent promise to yourself: this journey will change you. Even if you return home on crutches, the moon retreats as lanterns flicker to life, guiding your path through olive groves where night insects chirp a lullaby that's both haunting and oddly comforting. You sense that this spark, born from a speech at Clermont, is about to ignite wars whose true causes historians still debate, whether faith, power, or the simple lust for treasure. Either way, you tighten your grip on your wooden staff and step into history's waiting arms as dawn tingles on the horizon. You trudge along a narrow lane flanked by wheat fields rustling in the morning breeze. The camp merges into a restless blur of tents, wobbling wagons, and calloused feet. You stoop to drink from a shallow brook, its water tasting of iron and oblivion. Nearby, a ragged woman tends to her son's blistered feet with a poultice of onion juice and donkey milk, an odd folk remedy rumored to banish swelling overnight. The foul odor of livestock mingles with the sweet tang of wildflowers overhead. And you can't help but chuckle, because nothing bonds you quite like sharing a flea-infested blanket by your third sunrise on the road. You notice the well-armed knights outpacing barefoot peasants. Leaders huddle in wagons fitted with wooden horns for signaling, while merchants hawk holy salt that glows by moonlight, proof, they insist, of its divine origin. A traveling peddler demonstrates a saint's canine tooth, mounted on a gold pin, claiming it cures snake bites. You nod politely, tightening boots that squeal like startled goats, wondering how many more nights you'll trade muddy straw for stained dreams. And yet, somewhere between the clatter of armor and the promise of distant horizons, you feel the spark from Clermont flicker into a steady glow, ready to light the way forward. You trudge along a rutted path strewn with rocks the size of your fist, the dust whipping up in muted spirals around your ankles. Each step brings you closer to Constantinople's colossal walls, which loom on the horizon like a sleeping giant, wrapped in stone. Your cloak, already stained from weeks of travel, clings to your shoulders with a persistent stickiness of sweat and anticipation. You pause to wipe a bead of perspiration from your brow, only to smear a streak of dust across your cheek, proof that glamour wasn't exactly on the menu for this trip. A weary guard lounges beneath a crumbling archway, his halberd resting against chipped marble. He squints at you through a gap in his helmet, as if trying to decide whether you're more likely to be a peddler of relics or a peddler of trouble. The gates of Byzantium stay open for now, but rumors swirl like the dust around your boots. Emperor Alexios Komnenos has begrudgingly agreed to supply the Crusaders with provisions and safe passage, yet he does so with the wariness of someone letting a cobra into his parlor. You swallow hard, remembering that your meager purse contains only half the silver you thought you'd need. And that's before you've even haggled over lodging or bribes, your companions' forged brothers. In arms, though you barely know their names, move in clusters, fingers brushing the hilts of swords at the slightest provocation. One knight huffs a laugh when you ask about Byzantium's famed hippodrome, quipping that he'd sooner see his horse race a dragon than witness chariot races in a land full of shifting alliances. It's probably right, but the smell of spiced bread from a nearby bakery stalls your little complaint. Your stomach growls so loudly it might just scare off stray dogs. You spot a merchant cart painted with a leering lion. It's tied up at the roadside. The driver greets you with a curt nod and offers a vial of oriental perfume distilled from camel gland, strong enough to mask the stench of battle, he claims. You laugh softly, picturing a cloud of eau de camel drifting down the battlefield. But you tuck the vial into your satchel anyway. It might make a decent gag gift, or at least distract someone when the mood gets too grim. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine court saw the Crusaders as indispensable allies or ambitious barbarians bent on carving up their empire. Can almost hear the whispers bouncing between palace walls. Will these Westerners honor their oaths, or will they seize Constantinopolitan riches the moment the emperor turns his back? As you press on, you find evidence of uneasy arrangements everywhere. The graffiti of Latin crosses etched into city gates next to Greek inscriptions, and the ever-present patrols of Varangian guards. those hulking Norse warriors in Byzantine. Service, blades glinting like warning beacons. Their helmet crests bob in the breeze, looking more like ornamental plumes than symbols of trust. A sudden crack on the road makes you stumble. If your mule just rolled its ankle on a jagged cobblestone. The beast brays in pain, and you kneel to soothe it, murmuring reassurances you're not sure it understands. You recall the friar back at Claremont who insisted that the holy scent of frankincense calmed even the most stubborn mule. So now you wonder if that same friar ever dealt with stubbornness on four legs. You press a poultice of crushed mint leaves and vinegar against the wound. It's an offbeat remedy you picked up from a traveling healer who claimed mint doubled as insect repellent. Whether it actually stops flies from feasting on your pack animal remains questionable. But you'll be darned if your supplies won't smell minty fresh for the next 2 days. The road narrows as you enter a forest belt that rings the city. Dappled sunlight filters through knotted branches overhead, creating flickers that dance across mossy trunks. Somewhere a lark trills, its song oddly incongruous amid the clatter of armor and cartwheels. You pause to breathe deep, inhaling pine and damp earth. It's the first moment of calm you felt since leaving the fields of Claremont. And you almost allow yourself to believe you'll be safe once you reach the safety of Constantinople's walls. Almost. Your Guido wiry veteran named Stefan nudges you forward, glancing over his shoulder with a look that suggests he's weighing whether another band of crusaders might break into your wagons. You shift your balance, realizing the loaded barrels of salted meat and hardtack rattle every time you stumble. Stefan mutters something in Provencal, and you catch the word brigands. You can't help but grin, after months of fearing. Desert heat, dysentery, and Byzantine intrigue. You're back to worrying about highwaymen ripping you off in the woods. Some things never change. A shrill whistle cuts through the air as a mounted courier approaches, his garb flashing red and gold. He dismounts, gracefully an impressive feat considering the weight of his leg harness, and unfurls a parchment sealed with the imperial crest. Stefan and the knight beside you lean in. Reading the summons from Alexios, everyone must present identification and proof of purpose before passing the chain bridge. No one will cross without scrutiny. The courier pockets. The empty scroll tucks his horsewhip under one arm and smirks at you, revealing surprisingly white teeth. No free rides for Christ's sake, he jokes, his voice carrying a quiet edge. You return the smirk, though in your head you're tallying how many coins you'll need to slip past the customs desk as you approach the makeshift checkpoint. You notice Byzantine engineers operating a set of huge capstans designed to lift the chain that stretches across the Golden Horn. Their hands move with rhythmic precision, the roar of winches echoing against the water below. The Golden Horn glistens like spilled silver in the afternoon sun, dotted with fishing skiffs and merchant vessels. A faint haze of sea salt and tar drifts through the air, and you take a deep breath, savoring the temps. You're halfway across the world from home, yet you feel a surge of triumphant relief. You've made it to the cusp of one of history's greatest cities before you. The gates stand wide open, but you sense the unspoken message etched in every stone. Proceed with caution. Lanterns are being lit inside, even though dusk remains hours away, a Byzantine habit. Some say to remind visitors that shadows always linger in their halls. A group of Latin clerics huddles near the walls, their robes spotless despite days on the road. One of them crosses himself theatrically and murmurs a prayer in Latin. You catch a glimpse of his gold-embroidered stole and wonder if he's more interested in Byzantine relics than salvation. You can almost hear the snickers from local friars back in France. A stray cat darts across your path, pausing to arch its back and stare at you with unblinking green eyes. You remember that cat from your childhood? The one your grandmother swore carried cursed church bells around its neck. You laugh quietly because nothing sobers you up like a suspicious feline in unfamiliar territory. With a final nod to Stefan, you step under the archway, adjusting your cross so it peeks out from beneath your tunic. The city's hum washes over. You vendors shouting prices, church bells tolling in far-off districts, and the distant clang of metalwork. The smells of roasting lamb and fresh fish entwine in a mouth-watering swirl that almost makes you forget the tension pulsing beneath. Every interaction, you're inside the walls now, but the real journey has only just begun. You trudge through churned mud and scattered splinters as the battered Crusader host comes into view of Nicaea's forbidding walls. They loom like ancient ramparts from a tale you half remembered from a dusty history lecture 12 meters high, built by emperors with stone quarried from nearby quarries. The air is thick with the acrid temps of heated iron and smoke from ramrod fires, while your boots sink into soggy earth churned by horses and siege towers. You pause to catch your breath, clutching the cross at your chest, and realize this siege might be the first real trial of your resolve. A chorus of shouted orders echoes from the makeshift camp. Engineers, clad in soot-streaked tunics, screech encouragement at teams pulling rope to hoist a towering wooden tower toward the ramparts. You note how each segment creaks like an annoyed troll, and you half expect it to complain about arthritis before collapsing. A nearby squire wipes grease from his blade, leaning in conspiratorially. He's heard that the Byzantine engineers smuggled secret Greek fire devices among the siege engines, though some claim it's nothing more than double-crossed rumor. Historians still argue whether the Byzantines truly possessed a prototype, flamethrower at Nicaea, or if it's just a later embellishment to spice up chronicles. The camp smells like a tavern after closing time, spilled ale fermented in wooden vats, mixed with the coppery odor of blood from recent skirmishes and the sweet stench of rotting vegetables left too close to the flames. You wrinkle your nose and joke to the knight beside you that you miss the aroma of your grandmother's stew, only she'd taught you to cook over a battering ram. He snorts, patting his leather pouch of peppercorns, insisting it's more valuable than any relic hoarded by the city elders. Night falls, and the silhouette of Nicaea's walls becomes a jagged horizon against the violet sky. Torches flicker atop guard towers, revealing narrow arrow slits and crenellations that seem eager for your approach. Lanterns sway like fireflies in the wind, casting dancing shadows that look suspiciously like armored wolves. You hear the hiss of crossbows cocking and the thud of catapults hurling rocks that splinter against stone. A stray pebble thunks near your foot, and you step back, heart hammering. You realize that despite the grand speech at Claremont, this feels more like a giant game of pinball with you as the inevitable silver ball by dawn. You nurse a charred blister from your palm, courtesy of hauling a wind-choperated siege ladder. You've been told the Byzantines once experimented with harnessing stampeding goats to knock down gates, an odd tactic that allegedly failed when the goats panicked and stampeded back into the camp, toppling siege engines instead. You grimace, thinking you'd rather face 1,000 archers than a rampaging herd of caprines round you. Tents pitched in concentric circles smell of peppermint tan old folk remedy believed to ward off plague. Whether those mint leaves actually saved anyone's life remains questionable. The grand assault begins with a cacophony of trumpet blasts and drum rolls, each echoing off the walls like a call to Judgment Day. Knights in chainmail charge forward, lances leveled, while peasants hurl stones from makeshift catapults. You join a group of crossbowmen perched on a nearby hillock, settling into the churned dirt as you load quarrels. A veteran beside you aims and fires, remarking that a single well-placed bolt can drop a guard leaning over the battlements to toss water on burning oil. He grins and adds, maybe that's what they meant by taking a cold shower. You can't help but laugh, though your stomach knots at the thought of flames splashing back. Hours pass without a clear victory. You notice knights setting up a ram made from the mast of a seized Byzantine ship's prow, painted with a leering demon face to inspire fear. The sight reminds you of a carnival ride gone wrong. The demon-faced prow goring the city gate instead of harmless wooden beasts. You step forward to inspect it, running your fingers over the worn oak, aware that one misjudged thrust could crush your bones. The ram swings back and forth, roasting in the sun. And you recall a friar's offhand remark that rubbing the wood with crushed cicada shells would silence the squeaks. Apparently, the cicadas thought it was a courting ritual and have been chirping non-stop ever since suddenly at high noon. The camp erupts in cheers. A secret emissary from Alexios slipped through the outer defenses and brokered a clandestine deal. You overhear commanders whispering that the city will open its gates to the Byzantines alone, forcing the Crusaders to swear off loot. Though some suspect the emperor intends to let the Latins in through a hidden sally port once his back is turned. Historians still argue whether this backdoor arrangement was a clever diplomatic feat or a duplicitous stand that stung the Crusader pride. You lean in, curious and cautious, considering the price of empty stomachs versus empty promises. As the sun dips below the eastern ramparts, a flag of truce flutters over the western tower. A hush falls over the camp as you watch two delegations meet. One Byzantine, resplendent in purple and gold. The other fraying at the edges, patched by ages of travel. The Latin banner-bearer offers a small wooden chest, its lock a clever puzzle that even troubadours admire for craftsmanship. Inside lie 6 bejeweled icons taken from abandoned churches' gifts or tribute, depending on your perspective. Byzantine envoy examines them with tight lips, nods curtly, and raises an eyebrow so perfectly arched it seems carved rather than grown. The chest changes hands, and you sense both relief and resentment simmering in the evening air. That night, you join a celebratory supper around a sputtering fire. Barley loaves, dried figs, and a thin broth flecked with bits of goat cheese. Someone passes around a flask of dubious-smelling wine, claiming it was blessed by a Turkish sheik who converted under torture. Though others suspect the sheik simply liked free booze, you take a cautious sip, its flavor like watered-down vinegar. But the warmth it brings sends a ripple of contentment through your chest. The mood settles into a reluctant camaraderie, Byzantines and Latins toasting beneath the same sky. Walls no longer barriers, but silent witnesses to a strange partnership as you lie in your tent. The soot of day's battles still clinging to your hair, you trace the pattern on your cross-the-rough engraving, reminding you of why you marched all this way. The walls of Nicaea stand silent now, but in their stones you see questions yet unanswered. Was this siege a triumph of faith or of political expediency? Did the secret deal save countless lives or betray the Crusaders' sacred vow? Historians still argue whether the real breakthrough was military genius or a stroke of diplomatic luck. You drift toward sleep, the cringe of the goat rumor echoing softly, wrapping you in a haze of uncertainty. You wake at dawn to find the towers lowered, and the creek outside your tent murmuring through reeds. Pledges made and alliances woven, you slip back into your boots and step out to view Nicaea's surrendered gates. They stand open, the city's fate handed over without a single siege engine breaching the outer wall. You wonder if this silent entrance will haunt you more than the clash of swords. So you fasten your tunic and adjust your satchel. You realize that the first great hurdle of your crusade has passed, leaving you with a head full of questions and a heart full of longing for what comes next. You trudge over cracked earth, baked by the Syrian sun, each footstep kicking up heat-hazed dust that settles like a film of grit on your neck. The walls of Antioch stretch before you, immense and weathered by centuries, a mix of Roman masonry and later Byzantine buttresses. This citadel, perched atop twin hills, has barred your path for 8 long months. Its gates sealed against every assault and starving your comrades into shadows of themselves. You swallow a mouthful of gritty hardtack and brace for what's coming, the temps of sweat and desperation mingling on your tongue. Around you, knights tighten leather greaves and heft spear shafts that feel woodenly inadequate against those stone walls. A local guide mutters that the defenders once rolled boiling oil down these slopes. And you shudder, picturing rivulets of scalding liquid chasing you like a heat-seeking missile. Historians still argue whether that practice was common or mostly an invention by panicked chroniclers keen to spice up their tales. You remind yourself, no siege is ever boring, but this one's been more nerve-wracker than epic conquest. Night drapes its star-sprinkled cloak as your company crouches behind battered siege towers, their wheels sunk into dried clay. You pop a handful of salted almonds, nodding as the veteran beside you points skyward. "See that cluster of Orion?" he whispers. "They say the Crusaders believed it a sign of heavenly favor, though my cousin bet it was just a cloud of locusts." You grin, the crackle of candlenut oil lamps turning the camp into a flickering forest of shadows. It smells like a seaside tavern smoke, sweat, and a hint of fish from a nearby river crossing. At dawn, you join the assault. A horn blast rattles the air, loud enough to jar your teeth, and you sprint toward the wall under a thunder of arrows. You duck behind a mangled section of palisade, adrenaline thumping as if you've just stepped onto a roller coaster without warning. Modern, you would probably call this extreme sports, minus the safety harness and overpriced helmet cam. You pray your jerkin holds up while you're adrenaline-fueled. Heart insists it's ready to burst. A squire hands you a relic rumor the camp's been whispering about for days: a battered wooden shaft said to be a piece of the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side. They paraded it before the troops, claiming its touch could steady nerves and fell giants. You grip the relic, marveling at its rough-hewn grain and pondering how a sliver of wood could outweigh your fear. Some argue it was found by Peter Bartholomew's fevered prayers in a shallow trench, while others insist it was smuggled in by Armenian traders. Historians still argue whether its discovery was genuine or a desperate fabrication to lift morale. Whatever the truth, clutching that splintered stick feels like holding a lifeline. You charge alongside knights wearing helmets lined with goat skulls, an odd fringe tactic designed to deflect arrows. The goats allegedly sacrificed on the altar here were said to grant protective spirits, though you suspect the skulls did more to terrify goats than ward off real projectiles. A few men chatter that they saw the Crusader-infused skulls glow when hit by moonlight, but you figure that might be a trick of collective insomnia. Either way, the skull-clad brigade looks equal parts macabre and avant-garde, like a traveling cosplay show derailed by bloodthirsty ambitions. As you scale a ladder, your gauntlet hand slips, sending a metallic screech echoing off the stones. An arrow thunks into the ground just inches away, the shaft quivering like a startled cricket. You steady your grip, thinking you'll probably need a new glove, but grateful not to have lost more than your dignity. You reach the top, vaulting onto the parapet and landing in a cloud of dust and stones. The defenders recoil, startled by your sudden appearance, and you charge, your soul thrumming like a war drum. Inside the walls, chaos reigns. Flaming torches ignite wooden barricades, while trumpets blare competing tunes that clang against each other in ear-splitting disharmony. You duck under a swinging mace, swat away a frantic rooster that someone has apparently brought to battle, and bump into a knight nursing a severed glove, his gauntlet too heavy now that the finger's gone. You help him fumble a second freehand, joking that at least he won't lose a ring in a fingerless gamble. A surge of zeal rides through the wounded defenders as they rally for a counterstrike. You see a line of archers loosed on a gallery overhead. Without thinking, you toss a small firepot, a crude clay orb filled with pitch, over the battlement. It bursts in a hiss of flame that mirrors the shriek of a startled cat. You watch it cascade down, catching a section of palisade on fire. Someone yells jubilation, and you feel an intoxicating twist of pride and horror. When did lighting things on fire feel so satisfying? The battle tilts like a ship in stormy seas. Your comrades swarm through a newly created breach as if it's the only exit from a sinking ship. At one point, you dodge a charging mule apparently abandoned by its panicked rider before tumbling headfirst into a pile of fig preserves and spiced goat cheese. The sticky mess coats your armor, and you stifle a groan as you wipe sticky dollops from your visor. You joke to a passing crossbowman that at least you're well seasoned for your next heroic tale. By midday, the sun claws at your back like a relentless cat, and sweat trickles into your eyes, stinging like salt from the nearby sea. Someone tosses you a matron's remedy, a paste of ground olives and rose petals, said to soothe sunburn. You slather it on, only to sneeze when the blossoms tickle your nose. Whether it helps or just smells faintly floral remains up for debate. But at least you look more like a wandering poet than a sweaty sack of battle. At last, the last defenders hoist a tattered banner of surrender, their voices hoarse from shouting orders that fell on deaf ears. You step through the broken gate, noticing the eerie silence settling over the carnage like a shroud. The air smells of char and spilled wine, bitter perfume. Amid the ruins, you glimpse Armenian archers pausing to gather stray arrows as souvenirs. One young man smirks and says, "I'll trade you 3 of these for that goat skull helmet best fashion statement of the Crusade." You laugh, realizing that even amidst ruin, bartering and banter endure as you walk through Antioch's deserted streets. The clamoring of hammers and the cries of the wounded blend into a solemn procession. Children who snuck into the city during the fight now scurry from shadow to shadow, eyes wide like startled owls. You pocket a small iron horseshoe left behind by a dying knight rumored to bring good luck in the next battle. Fringe medicine. Or not, you tuck it inside your tunic, convinced you'll need every ounce of fortune in the trials ahead. You pause at the city's main square, where once stately buildings now stand scarred by siege machines. A battered column bears a carved relief of Roman god Jupiter's face, chipped. Venus leaning as if crouching under some invisible weight. You trace the grooves with your finger, thinking about how empires rise and crumble under the same sun. That still beats down mercilessly. Here in the heat and dust, you feel the weight of every step you've taken, of every life crossed by a spear's arc. Fires are lit at dusk, and priests wheel out a makeshift altar for a Thanksgiving Mass. You kneel on uneven cobblestones, smoothing the grit from your knees, and listen as a priest intones chants that echo off battered walls. The holy lance is held aloft, its rough grain glowing in the flickering torchlight. You bow your head, sensing a hush that feels almost holy, even as nearby men laugh low and swap stories of how they drove pigs at the defenders to create a diversion. Whether that tactic was mere prank or military tactic, you'll never know, but the memory of squealing swine amidst war will likely haunt your dreams. Night settles softly over Antioch, and you lie under a canopy of stars dotted above crumbling towers. The relic rests beside you, warm from the day's sun. And you wonder if this victory was earned through faith, brute force, or sheer luck. Historians still argue whether the siege's success owed more to disciplined tactics or the surge of religious zeal that made seasoned soldiers fight as if possessed, drift toward a much-needed sleep. The distant howls of stray dogs mingle with the whisper of the Holy Lance's rough wood, reminding you that tomorrow the crusade marches on. You trudge through shattered arches and over-broken mosaics as the Crusader host encircles Jerusalem's walls under the harsh July sun. The golden stones, quarried by Fatimid builders and installed decades earlier, glint like burnished brass, making the city seem both sacred and untouchable. Dust swirls around your ankles, catching in the scruff of your unwashed tunic, while the breeze carries distant calls to prayer in Arabic and Latin alike. Every inhalation tastes of sweat, sand, and the faint sweetness of almond orchards beyond the city gates. You press your hand against the warm limestone, marveling that these walls once repelled Saladin's forces, only to now stand on the brink of collapse beneath your comrades' siege engines. Inside the camp, siege towers groan forward, unscorched. Wheels moving in lockstep with battering rams shaped like the jaw of a leviathan. Tents of dyed silk flap feebly beside more rudimentary shelters slapped together from branches and tattered cloaks. A squire hands you a battered crossbow, its stock decorated with a tiny silver davin, offbeat charm said to ensure your bolt finds a true Christian heart. You rack in a quarrel and aim at a crenellation where defenders pour down boiling oil. Rumor has it they once mixed that oil with camel milk to make it clingier, though whether it actually burned hotter or just smelled more exotic remains an open question. Historians still argue whether such mixtures were battlefield innovation or mere tall tales tossed around campfires to frighten newcomers. At dawn, you join a creeping advance along a ruined causeway, bloodied banners snapping overhead like frayed prayer flags. The breach is narrow, only wide enough for 2 men abreast and littered with hewn stones the size of small calves. You duck beneath a makeshift mantlet, feeling the tremor of trebuchet shots that rain down from nearby hills. One shot sends a chunk of rock skittering past your boot, carving a gouge in the dried mud. You leap forward, heart pounding like a war drum, thinking modern extreme sports would pale in comparison. Around you, crossbowmen report that the city's defenders have begun hurling cow dung with catapults to infect your forces, a bizarre tactic that smells awful but apparently was considered a medieval version of biological warfare. You gag, dropping to one knee to retie your shoelace instead of breathing in more of that rancid perfume. An opening appears as one siege tower lurches into position against an eastern wall. Knights in steel rise like phantoms from the top platform, shields ringing as they leap onto crumbling battlements. You follow, scrambling up the ladder with greaves that slip on the soaked ropes, ankles twisting in protest. At the summit, you feel the electric thrill of stepping onto the city itself. The view over Jerusalem spreads out like a treasure chest, minarets and church spires, palm groves that sway like green lanterns, and markets still bright with colored tents beyond the walls. A local boy ducks out of sight, clutching a loaf scored with a cross, his eyes wide as if he's glimpsed a ghost. You almost feel guilty seeing fear in those pupils until you remember the months of starvation your friends endured to reach this moment. Once inside, the city transforms into a whirlwind carnival of plunder and prayer. Knights dump sacks of saffron, myrrh, and Roman glass beads into heaps by the Jaffa Gate, trading them like coins for fresh water. A bearded merchant unfurls a bolt of crimson silk, rumored to be spun by nuns at a Syrian convent. You run your fingers along its threads, half expecting the cloth to murmur a hymn. Nearby, a chaplain stands before a makeshift altar of cracked tiles, blessing every loot-laden chest with holy water. You pause to kneel, whispering a prayer for your fallen comrades, even as your pouch jingles with stolen gemstones. The bracing scent of frankincense wafts through the thoroughfare, mixing oddly with the acrid tang of burned wood from torched shops. Amid the chaos, pilgrims shout hallelujahs, tears streaking dust-smeared cheeks. Some collapse in grateful exhaustion at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, tracing their bloodied fingers over marble slabs they believe to cover Christ's tomb. A flagellant brother scours his back with a whip fashioned from date palm fronds, convinced each welt brings him closer to purification. Yet just steps away, another knight haggles over the price of a golden chalice, joking that he'll trade 2 goats and his lucky codpiece shaped like a dove, no less for the church's silver candlesticks. You can't help but grin, because nothing says divine mission like turning sacred vessels into backyard yard sale delights. The dust rises in lazy spirals as you wander to the north wall. You find a group of looters prying at a locked chest carved with Hebrew letters. Their efforts yield a surprising prize: a dozen small silver bells once used to scare away evil spirits in local folk rites. One knight places 1 bell inside each helmet, insisting the gentle ringing will warn of incoming arrows, though others mutter it merely broadcasts your position. You hook 2 bells to your belt anyway, because if nothing else, they'll make fine cocktail decorations when you get home. Late afternoon sun slants through the narrow lanes, and you climb to a rooftop terrace to admire the desert plains stretching north. The air shimmers in waves, and you spot a caravan inching along the horizon, camels hunched under burdens of spices and pilgrims. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the bittersweet taste of triumph. Yet, beneath that pride, you sense unease. Was this conquest born of pure devotion or the lure of wealth that glittered in every shop and shrine? Historians still argue whether the massacre that followed was an uncontrollable outbreak of religious zeal or a strategic cleansing to secure the city's trade routes. The streets grow quieter as sunset bleeds into violet. You help a wounded soldier gingerly remove splinters of Jerusalem stone embedded in his leg, using a poultice of crushed figs and olive oil, a remedy said to draw out infection and seal wounds. The wounded grunt and fall into a haze of semi-conscious dreaming, murmuring prayers to St. George and threatened curses on the infidels. You tuck the wounded man's dagger in your belt for safekeeping. Half shamed, it feels heavier in your hand than before. Night settles softly, and torches line the Via Dolorosa with wavering light that turns every doorway into a dark invitation. You wander toward the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where flickering candles cast your shadow long and thin against ancient stone. Unable to resist, you reach out and touch the cold marble, imagining Christ's hand resting here. A gentle hush falls over the plaza as a lone priest chants vespers in Latin, his voice rising above the distant clatter of looters closing shop for the night. You close your eyes, letting the final notes wash over you like a benediction before you leave. You pause at a fountain fed by a spring said to bubble from beneath Mount Sion. You lean in, cupping cool water in your hands and splashing it on your dusty cheeks. The water tastes of earth and something sweeter you can't name, perhaps, the promise of mercy after the day's frenzy. You wipe your face and catch your reflection in the polished surface. Grime-streaked tunic, weary eyes, a half-smile that flirts with triumph and guilt in equal measure. You weigh the treasures in your satchel, jewels, relics, handbags sewn from camel leather, and wonder if any will soothe your conscience back home as you turn away. The bells you hooked to your belt tinkle softly, echoing through the narrow lanes one last time. In that gentle ring, you hear hope, regret, and the unspoken question pulsing beneath every crusader's vow. Was this Jerusalem's fall a testament to faith, a bid for power, or the simplest hunger for greed? You step into the gathering darkness, lantern in hand, ready to follow your companions onward, and uncertain if history will ever settle the debate. You trudge past the shattered gates of Jerusalem and into a sun-baked plain where the air shimmers like a mirage. Every blade of grass seems dusted with history and loot. As dawn breaks, you find yourself helping to set boundary markers around Acre, Jaffa, and Gaza, lines drawn half with ink and half with sword edges. The leaders cloak these acts in divine purpose, declaring that God wills new realms in the Holy Land. Yet the parchments you hold smell faintly of sheep's wool and fear. A reminder that drawing kingdoms on maps seldom aligns with drawing swords. For land. Across this plain, tents cluster into 4 principalities: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli. You witness Baldwin of Boulogne receive Edessa's keys in 1098. It's becoming its first counter-mainstream fact you memorized back on the road to Constantinople. He steps into the citadel with an air of triumph, though his crown is little more than a circlet of braided leather studded with glass beads that glint like miscast gems. The pomp feels oddly humble, like watching a coronation in a sheep pen. You help haul his throne a carved oak chair heavy enough to need for Menand. Can't resist a whisper. Does it come with a wheeled base for redeployment? In the background, you overhear a scribe mutter that the Pope never intended this patchwork of states, but rather a single, unified Latin patriarchate. Historians still argue whether the papal legate, Daimbert of Pisa, or the opportunist nobles drove the splintering of authority. You can practically feel the tension crackle in every candlelit council meeting. One noble insists that Acre belongs to him by right of spear tip. Another claims seniority based on years in chainmail. Their squabbles echo like a tavern brawl. But now, unfortunately, notification of death is permanent. As you lay out parchments on a plank table, you trace the shaky outlines of fortress towns with your finger. The salt breeze from the Mediterranean stings your eyes, and you blink away gritty tears. Nearby, a cleric moves among the feuding lords, blessing each in turn with holy water drawn from a well near Mount Nebo. He murmurs vows that every castle built will be for defense of Christendom, though you can't help but notice his coin pouch bulge whenever a grateful lord steps forward. Fringe rumor has it that the water itself was blessed over an overturned Donkian offbeat ceremony said to imbue miraculous strength. Though whether the donkey survived remains unconfirmed. In the murmur of voices, you hear Baldwin of Boulogne's brother, Godfrey of Bouillon, refuse to call himself King of Jerusalem, settling for advocate of the Holy Sepulchre instead. You scratch at a scab on your elbow, recalling how you once used honey and dried fig paste to treat a wound after Antioch. That remedy seemed to banish infection, but it also attracted more flies than friends. Godfrey's restraint tastes noble but thin. Blood-stained hands seldom feel comfortable without a crown. You wonder if calling yourself advocate is a pious nod or a dusty trick to dodge responsibility. Messenger on horseback arrives with scrolls sealed. It's by Pope Paschal II. He summons the lords to answer for irregular tithes and unauthorized pacts with local emirs. The papal bull scrolls, topped by the infamous leaden bull seal, rattle faintly like distant thunder when you lift them. Each lord eyes the letters warily as though they were poisoned darts. You hide a grin because nothing says divine. Write like threatening excommunication if you don't pay your dues on time as midday sun climbs. You walk the ramparts of Tripoli's newly christened castle. The stones glow honey gold, and the breeze carries the scent of citrus orchards below. You stop to tie your belt bells, those tiny silver jangles that once marked your steps in Jerusalem, so that any stray arrow might sing a warning. A local monk explains that the bells were originally temple charms to ward off jinn. Whether they actually repel spirits or simply announce your arrival remains a point of debate around campfires. You shake your head and clip them back on. Jingling news is better than silent surprises below. Feudal levies drill in formations. Peasants, pressed into service, swing wooden pikes carved from olive branches while knights in mismatched armor shout commands. You join a pair of Norman spearmen swapping stories of fighting in Sicily. It's marveling at how the same blade once crossed against Muslims there now stands for defense here. They laugh, saying they feel like archaeological artifacts reused. Bits of old campaigns recycled into new crusades. You nod. The absurdity of it all washing over you like a cool breeze you haven't felt in weeks. Back in the council tent, the PayPal legate weighs in on taxation and laws. He's a fine orator with a voice that could calm storms. Yet, you notice, his quill scratching out nodal points like a school teacher correcting homework. He bickers with Raymond of Toulouse over who should govern Tyre, and their barbed words sink sharper than any crossbow bolt. Historians still argue whether the legate's influence kept the fragile alliance afloat or simply fostered resentment among ambitious princes. You lean in closer, curious if the next blow will come from a fist or a pointed protest. As dusk settles, you help hoist a banner above the new citadel of Antioch. Its red cross fades into bands of gold and black, signifying lords who once feuded over inheritance, now forced into uneasy coalition. A minstrel sets up nearby, strumming a lute and singing ballads freshly penned about distant France. He claims his songs share the true stories of widows and orphans left in Crusaders' wake, though some listeners swear he only wrote one verse and loops it endlessly. You toss him a coin anyway, because at least the repetition lulls you toward sleep. You wander into a shadowed courtyard where a small garden grows between tents. Figs, pomegranates, and an odd bed of cilantro imported by a hermit knight who believes the herb wards off melancholia. Fringe sources say he once ate so much cilantro that he spoke entirely in rhyme for a fortnight. If you pluck a leaf and chew it, it's Thames leaping across your tongue. Whether it cures sadness or just makes breath interesting is still up for debate. Among weary travelers, night's cool hush settles over the Crusader camp as torches flicker in rhythm with crickets. You stoke embers in a fire pit and settle onto a crate beside two barons arguing the legitimacy of souls who die fighting for the preside. Cross versus those who die tending vineyards. Their debate is as spirited as any charge in battle and twice as circular. You stifle a laugh, recalling your cousin's story of a wine barrel rolling off a ramp and crushing half a tent of Crusaders, one casualty for every cask. You muse that maybe this dispute would end quicker if they tossed in a barrel of wine to sweeten the verdict. Leaning back, gaze up at the stars that watched you fight at Nicaea and Antioch and fall before Jerusalem's walls. Press your hand against the leather-bound charter granting you land around Acre, the edges stained with blood and ink alike. You can almost feel the pull of home, your mother's gentle scolding for chasing glory, your neighbor's query about how to sow lavender in your heirs' fields. And yet, beneath your resolve, you wonder if these new kingdoms are built on pillars of faith or piles of ambition dressed in holy robes. A breeze carries the faint tinkle of your belt bells, echoing across the slate rooftops. In their gentle ring you hear unity, discord, hope, and greed, all jostling for space. You tuck the charter into your satchel, lean into the shadows, and whisper to yourself, may God guide these realms. Or at least watch the neighbors' backs. You trudge through a sodden field outside Vizela in the spring of 1147, waterlogging your boots and dampening the fervor that once surged beneath your cross-emblazoned mantle. The air tastes of manure and budding hope, though mostly manure. After weeks of torrential rains, from this muddy gathering point, the host of the Second Crusade forms in two royal contingents, Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany, each draped in banners that flap against the wind like soggy kites. You grip your wooden staff tighter, wondering if your joints will ever warm up again. the mainstream fact is impossible to ignore. The Pope himself called this crusade to avenge the fall of Edessa in 1144 and reclaim it for Christendom. As the French column sets out, you notice Eleanor of Aquitaine riding alongside Louis, her elegant silks soaked through by a sudden downpour. You imagine her lamenting more about ruined gowns than lost territories. She dips her handkerchief into a puddle, teasing a laugh. If only my hair were so forgiving. You nod, but can't help thinking she'd trade a dozen dresses for half. A dozen dry socks. Beneath the surface, leadership rifts already fester. Soldiers whisper that Conrad resents Louis's PayPal endorsement, while Louis grumbles that Conrad's stubborn pace leaves French archers wading through ankle-deep muck. Historians still argue whether personal pride doomed coordination from the start. The road to the Rhine is an unending corridor of clanking armor and groaning wagons. Horses flounder, dragging carts of hardtack that sprout maggots like fungal blooms. You pinch your nose when a squire opens a crate labeled blessed biscuits, only to find rock-hard rations oozing vinegar and spoiled grains. You joke that these biscuits would make a fine pillow if you ever lay down. Nearby, a fringe rumor circulates that certain knights smeared donkey brain under their bassinets to ward off fever. Though you suspect the stench did more to attract flies than banish illness. Crossing into German lands, you trudge past thatched cottages where villagers stare at your bloated host like it's a misplaced shipwreck. One elderly woman offers you a bowl of sauerkraut and ale-soaked cheese. You swallow a spoonful and almost gag, but it warms your belly so thoroughly you forgive her for the taste. You recall a fellow marcher slathered garlic paste across his cheeks, claiming it deflected Turkish arrows. Did you doubt any weapon, ever? Mistook garlic breath for threat at the River Rhine. You watch Conrad's men struggling to repair a pontoon bridge ripped apart by the spring flood. Lumber floats downstream like lost promises, and you crouch to tie your boots tighter, contemplating the absurdity of launching holy war when you can't even launch a stable bridge. Modern, you would probably invest in a waterproof phone case. Medieval you just curses the heavens. Finally, after weeks of misery, you slip into the Bosphorus's silver waters. Belgian nights, screaming like startled fish, and emerge on the shores of Constantinople. Louis greets you with a weary smile, blood speckling his hose from a misjudged fishbone. You laugh together because nothing bonds you like near drowning and low culinary standards. Yet, beneath the laughter, you sense unease. Stomachs are empty, horses dead, and princely promises as soggy as your clothes in Byzantium. You witness Conrad's impatience boil into open contempt. He questions Alexius's provisions, accusing the emperor of stalling for his own advantage. Louis, ever polite, arranges feasts of stale bread and rancid cheese to appease the Greek court. You poke at the cheese, joking that it would pass for a new siege engine designed to crumble under the enemy's teeth. But you note every contract, signed in candlelit halls, each parchment sealed with a spidery squiggle, because these fragile treaties will carry you far into Anatolia when you finally march east of Nicomedia. The path changes from quagmire to scorching dust bowl. Horses collapse under the sun, their hooves cracking like empty gourds. You swallow a pebble of salt to brace against dehydration, but it only makes your tongue swell. You remember the salty breeze of Acre, and you wonder why you longed for this dessert so fervently. A fellow knight reveals a vial of miracle rainwater, supposedly collected during a storm near Jerusalem's walls. He offers you a taste. You sip and find it indistinct proof that if it was miraculous, was at least undetectable. At the Battle of Dorylaeum in October 1147, you join Conrad's flank as German knights clash with Seljuk Turks, the mainstream. Fact is stark. The Germans suffer a crushing ambush that decimates their vanguard, forcing a desperate counterattack to rescue survivors. You scramble over rocks slick with blood and rain-soaked armor, the clang of steel muffled by thunder overhead. One ambushed knight shouts that he used a fox pelt under his mail to reduce arrow rebounds, though most dismiss it as superstition. Historians still argue whether the ambush was due to Turkish mastery of lowland tactics or to the Crusaders' poor reconnaissance. You barely escape with a handful of allies, hearts pounding like war drums. You quip that you retreated to an impromptu obstacle course, guess the next events survive the flank ambush, but the jest falls flat. A friend limps past, bleeding from a dozen arrow grazes, a hollow look in his eyes. In camp that night, tents crackle under torrential rain, and you shelter beneath a wagon's canopy with two Norman spearmen. They trade stories of castles stormed and lost, each more contradictory than the last. One swears he boiled lizard juice to soothe his cough. The other claims he cured scurvy with a diet of wild caperberries. You roll your eyes, offering a flask of lukewarm wine to settle their stomachs and their debates. The French army arrives weeks later, slowed by Eleanor's lavish entourage and malfunctioning siege equipment gifted by Byzantium. You note Louis's frustration when his trebuchets frequently collapse under their own weight. Like carnival rides designed by drunks, you volunteer to test one with a boulder. Eye collapses before you can count to 3. Louis growls, "Perhaps we should have demanded better quality control from the craftsmen." You nod, smearing yet another wad of vinegar and maggot. Biscuit in your mouth as a grim snack. In spring 1148, the crusade thrusts toward Damascus, encouraged by King Baldwin III of Jerusalem. You trudge across red clay that glues your boots to the earth under an eastern sun so fierce it warps the horizon. You pitch your tent beside Syrian orchards that smell of figs and jasmine, odd comfort in this grim campaign. Yet the siege dissolves after mere days. When Crusader leaders squabble over water rights and nighttime sentries blame each other for false alarms, you laugh bitterly at the irony. The city most prized for its gardens sours on discord. A fringe rumor spreads that the princes considered using a herd of goats, fitted with flaming shoes to set the orchards ablaze, a tactic meant to frighten defenders with burning bleats. You dismiss it as lunacy, but can't shake the image of flaming goats charging through Damascus. Historians still argue whether the real failure lay in insufficient manpower or in the disastrous timing that saw rain wash away all siege works overnight as you break camp. You press your soggy cross against your chest and wonder how this crusade ended so quickly. You recall the speeches of Clermont and your mother's warning that crusading promised glory but delivered misery. The Second Crusade collapses not with a battle cry, but with a damp whimper, leaders blaming each other. Supplies ruined by rain and a treasury drained by grand but empty gestures. You trudge away, boots caked in red clay, pondering if this folly was ever truly about reclaiming Edessa, or merely a convocation of ego-driven monarchs chasing headlines. Your heart sinks as you realize the Crusade's only conquest was of morale. Yet as you lift your gaze to the storm-gray sky, you resolve to press onward because history's next chapter waits no matter how many puddles you wade through. You trudge across a scorched plain that still hums with the echoes of crushed shields and shattered faith. The same dust that once clung to goat skull helmets, now staining your boots again. The air carries a distant chant in Arabic, rising from Saladin's camp like a wave warning of an incoming tide. Torches flicker against the olive groves, casting shadows that dance like jinn on the gnarled trunks. You pause to brush sweat from your brow, tasting the temps of salt and old fear on your tongue. Fear of the man whispered to be both a paragon of chivalry and a ruthless conqueror. The mainstream fact is unavoidable. In July 1187, Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, united Muslim forces and led them to a decisive victory at the Battle of Hattin, crushing the Crusader army and paving the way for Jerusalem's recapture. You can almost feel the tremor of that moment beneath your feet, the thunder of horses, the crack of lances, and the day the true cross, once carried like a shield, tumbled into enemy hands. You tighten your grip on your weathered staff, imagining how knights you once counted as allies fell under the desert sun, parched and surrounded by the camp's edge. You catch the scent of saffron and rosewater mixed with fresh dung from Saladin's stables. A cook beside you lifts the lid of a simmering cauldron, revealing pieces of lamb slow braised in pomegranate juice. A fringe tidbit from camp gossip claims that Saladin's personal chef was a monk saved from Antioch, who vowed loyalty after Saladin offered him sanctuary instead of the noose. You dip your finger in the broth and flick a drop to your lips, tastes of sweet triumph and tingles with promise. Whether that conversion story is true or just another garnish in Saladin's legend remains questionable. You edge closer to a circle of tents draped in green banners, feeling the pull of centuries pressing into your chest. The camp buzzes with activity. Cavalry squires oiling stirrups, archers stringing recurve bows like drawn lightning, and courtiers haggling over camels imported from the Arabian desert. You overhear one eunuch boasting of a horse that drank nothing but wine, claiming it was Saladin's favorite steed. Though skeptics whisper the tale arose from misunderstanding the Arabic word for noble as inebriated, you smirk, thinking medieval marketing wasn't so different from today's hype. Night falls, and a crescent moon hangs low over Saladin's pavilion, lighting the camp in pale silver. You settle on a low crate warmed by embers, still glowing. From a midday fire, the cook hands you a lump of flatbread, brushed with olive oil and sprinkled with za'atar, its aroma bringing back memories of cilantro beds in Tripoli and the clatter of bells on your belt. You bite into the bread, its edges crisp, and savor the temps of time. It's hard to swallow, though, when you think of the famine that struck Crusader strongholds after Hattin. Hunger gnawing sharper than any sword. A herald clad in spotless white robes steps forward, bearing an olive wood box fashioned like a shrine. A hush falls across the square of tents as Saladin himself emerges tall, lean, and clad in chainmail, so fine it almost shimmers. Lantern light glints off his steel helm, and you feel an odd hush sweep through you, even as 3 camels bray in the distance. He lifts the box and displays the keys to Jerusalem, taken from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. A ripple of awe and dismay flickers through your veins. You recall kneeling before those very doors, tracing the marble with dusty fingertips only. To learn now they lie in new hands, as Saladin speaks. His voice carries a quiet authority that feels like a lullaby and a war cry all at once. He offers safe passage for Christians wishing to leave Jerusalem, permitting unarmed pilgrims to visit shrines if they pay a modest tax. Historians still argue whether this policy was born of genuine tolerance or economic pragmatism, meant to fill coffers depleted by decades of rivalry and tribute to distant caliphs. Either way, you sense the tension between mercy and strategy coiled in every syllable. A young Mamluk beside you bends to retrieve a slender, curved dagger tipped with gold. He runs a finger along the blade's edge and murmurs. They say this was forged with sand from Hattin itself, imbued with the battle's spirit. You raise an eyebrow at the open debate phrase and wonder if such a myth might be a clever ploy to boost morale. The dagger gleams like a sliver of daylight. It's promising both elegance and violence. Saladin invites you forward, and part of you hesitates, recalling your cousin's tale of a Crusader knight who drank hemlock disguised in a goblet of wine at Saladin's table. Though fringe sources argue the knight simply had a fatal reaction to local herbs. You swallow hard, remembering the lukewarm wine you shared under Norman tents, and step into his light. He greets you with a nod and offers a taste of sweet mead aged in beeswax casks. You accept, thinking a risk-free sip can't hurt. Mead's golden weight slides down your throat, leaving you briefly dizzy with hospitality. Nearby, a court poet recites verses praising Saladin's generosity, describing him as Lion of Islam, Fox of the battlefield, a hybrid of courage and cunning. You chuckle softly because nothing quite encapsulates Saladin like an animal mashup. Yet you can't ignore the undercurrent of steel as he orders the release of 50 captive crusaders, an act often lauded as chivalric. Though some crusader nobles grumble that Saladin violated the spoils of war tradition. You lean in, tasting the tension between legend and raw politics in the evening air. Later, you're shown a stable where white doves circle Saladin's favorite warhorse. You recall that bird motif carved into Norman shields and feel a pang of nostalgia for those goat skull brigades at Antioch. The horse, named Beluca, stamps impatiently, and some say it senses battle before dawn breaks. You slip a handful of oats into your pouch, planning to trade them later for a token of this camp's life. You whisper a fleeting prayer. May fortune favor both friend and foe as midnight approaches. Drums begin a low, rhythmic beat that vibrates through the ground and migrates up your spine. You lie on a woven mat outside the pavilion, listening to the call to prayer drift through the camp. The melody weaves between the bray of camels and the distant laughter of children born under Saladin's rule. You close your eyes, letting the cadence carry you somewhere between reverence and dread. In the hush before dawn, you remember the Battle of Hatton's choking heat, the crack of shields, and the moment the true cross fell. Now you face the dawn with Saladin's keys hanging at your belt, a symbol of negotiated peace or strategic victory, depending on who's retelling the story. Whether his gestures sprang from genuine magnanimity or were calculated moves in a chess game of empires. Historians still argue whether Saladin's chivalry was an authentic ideal or a masterful stratagem. You drift toward sleep beneath a canopy of black silk embroidered with silver crescents, the flicker of distant torches casting dancing constellations above. The desert wind sifts through the tent flap like a whispered secret. You feel the weight of history settling in your bones, heavier than any sword, as you wonder if chivalry and ruthless strategy can ever truly coexist. You trudge down a narrow coastal road at dawn, salt-laden breeze whipping your cloak against your knees as trumpets blare from two opposing camps. On one hill, Richard Plantagenet's banner three lions, Passant Gardens naps in the wind. On the other, Philip Augustus's fleur-de-lis glitters like spilled gold under the rising sun. The Third Crusade, called in 1189 to reclaim Jerusalem after its fall in 1187, swells around you with royal fanfare and whispered rivalries a mainstream. Fact no one can ignore, your boots clatter on cobblestones en route to the joint council. At Messina, Sicily, where both monarchs paused to gather ships, the smell of brine and roasting lampreys drifts from harbor stalls, chasing away the scent of sweaty horses and damp mail. You pause to swat at a fly buzzing an old knight's nose, who grumbles that the insects here are fatter than French peasants after Lent. You grin because nothing bonds crusaders like shared annoyance over oversized bugs. Inside a whitewashed hall, you witness Richard stride in, sword at his hip. His helm lined with wolf fur. A fringe rumor claims he added the pelt to channel a wolf's hunting instinct, though skeptics sniff at such embellishment. Philip follows behind, expression as tight as a harp string, his gilded surcoat spotless despite weeks at sea. You overhear nobles whisper that Philip resents Richard's nickname, Lionheart, accusing him of more spectacle than substance. Historians still argue whether personal pride or genuine piety fueled their rivalry. A council table groans with amphorae of wine and platters of salted fish. Richard splashes a goblet to toast Christ's cause, then quips that the fish tastes like holy smelt, earning ripples of laughter and a thrown lemon. Philip raises an eyebrow, sipping ginger wine and muttering about better vintages back home. You tuck a piece of candied citron into your pouch chan, offbeat treat, rumored to calm seasick stomachs, though you'll probably snack on it if the council gets too tedious. That evening, you join a procession through Messina's streets. Torches flame against pastel walls, and vendors hawk Sicilian oranges stacked like miniature suns. A street performer juggles live lizards claimed to be basilisks, distant cousins, and you jostle forward, almost dropping your helm. You recall? The Goat Skull Brigade at Antioch and Smyrk. Medieval crusading has its fair share of cosplay moments. The next day, you board a galley bound for Acre. The deck pitches underfoot. The salty spray smacks your face like a cold whip. You grip the rail, gagging slightly as someone empties a chamber pot over the side, proof that nobility and nausea go hand in hand. You share a bench with a herald who proudly displays a lead-lined boot said to deflect arrows by dulling their tips. You raise an eyebrow at the open debate. Historians still argue whether those boots ever saw battle, or were just a squire's tall tale. Midway across the Mediterranean, a storm blows in. You huddle below deck beside barrels of salted pork oozing brine, thankful for any shelter that isn't carved from ship planks. A sailor insists that praying to a wooden shrine of St. Elmo on deck calms the sea, though you suspect it's just a lucky ritual for superstitious mariners. Lightning cracks overhead, and you joke that modern, you would call it weather fails. Compilation. The herald laughs so hard he nearly drops his lead boot into the salt pork by the time you sight Acre's towers. Morning mist swirls around galleys like ghostly sails. Philip's ships hover to starboard, Richard's to port. You step onto the shore, sand crunching beneath your boots, and taste the tang of impending conflict, thicker than any fish market stench. Richard strides ahead, rallying his troops with a roar that echoes off the walls. Philip stands back, folding his arms as if auditioning for a royal portrait. You can't help wondering if they came for Jerusalem more merely for the glory of outshining each other. That night, under crescent moon, tavern's flickering lanterns, Richard confides in you over a mug of spiced mead. He admits he envies Philip's easy smile and smooth diplomacy, quipping that he'd trade half his lands for a day without tongues wagging about his hot temper. You nod, stirring your mead with a skewer of preserved cherries. And exotic garnish pilgrims swear wards off scurvy, though you suspect it's more about making drink look fancy. Across the room, Philip discreetly questions a Templar about Richard's next move, his voice low enough that only you catch the tension. 2 tables apart, their envoys exchange veiled insults, veiled as pleasantries, one praising French wine's elegance, the other lauding English honey's fortitude. You stir a bowl of garlicky fava beans and muse that nothing says holy mission like diplomatic backstabbing over appetizers. Before dawn, a messenger arrives with news. Saladin fortifies the walls of Acre, preparing for siege. Richard slaps the messenger's shoulder and laughs, "We'll crack those stones like brittle nuts," earning a nervous chuckle from nearby knights. Historians still argue whether Richard's bombastic bravery here was inspirational or reckless swagger as you strap on your greaves at first light. You catch a reflection in a puddle-dust-streaked tunic, weary eyes, and 2 bells tinkling at your belt like an overzealous elevator chime. You pause, remembering your poultice of figs and olive oil in Jerusalem and the goat skull helmets that clacked under moonlight. Now, you brace for a siege that will test more than siege engines. It will test whether these kings' shared faith can withstand their private ambitions. You trudge toward the walls, steel ringing with each step, and exhale a breath that tastes of salt, spice, and something unsettled. Philip's banner flutters to your left, Richard's to your right. Between them, the pale stones of Acre gleam like a challenge. You tighten your grip on your cross, whispering a promise to press on because glory, faith, and politics are bound tighter than any chain across the Golden Horn. You trudge toward the walls of Acre, steel ringing with each step, the salty breeze tangling with the acrid smoke of campfires. Seagulls wheel overhead, their cries sharp against the drone of buzzing flies. Behind you, a line of ships bob in. The harbor like restless hounds, rigging, creaking with the stirring of renewed hope. The siege, which began in August 1189, has stretched into its second year and stretched your patience even further. Each morning you wake to the groan of mangonels heaving stones that thud against the battered ramparts, hurling clouds of dust that cloak the beach in a haze as opaque as the promises of truce. Around you, the Crusader encampment is a jigsaw of tents, each pitched on marshy sand laced with stagnant water. The odor is unforgettable, a pungent stew of rotting fish, camp, refuse, and human waste. You pinch your nose and wonder if modern hazmat suits would have helped her if they'd just trap in the nausea. A squire beside you mutters about the Acre stink being part of the initiation rite for new recruits, which you suspect is fringe propaganda to scare off milder stomachs. He lifts a rag to his face, smeared with vinegar and Mintanod folk remedy that rumor claims keeps plague at bay. Though whether it works or simply replaces one stink with another remains up for debate. Historians still argue whether disease or enemy sallies claimed more lives during the siege. Your boots squelch through a shallow pool by a makeshift latrine, the wooden planks slick with grime. A rat darts beneath your foot, claws skittering like tiny talons. You stifle a yelp, grateful your helmet is more rat-repellent than goat skull cosplay ever was. This rat, some say, once gnawed through a knight's boot mid-battle, offbeat. Tidbit that earns laughs until someone checks their own ankles. You remember the goat dung sunscreen trick you swore you'd avoid. But here you try anything short of donkey milk though. Know a peasant girl who patched her father's armor with it and swore it repelled sunburn. Whether dung or dairy. The boundaries between bright ideas and gross survival hacks feel delightfully blurry. At dawn, you join a wave of archers crouched behind sharpened pickets. You notch an arrow and draw your bowstring, the wood creaking like a reluctant friend. Across the courtyard, shields glint in the first light. And you spot Saladin's crescent banners fluttering inside, a stark reminder of what you've come for. A horn blast jolts you, and you release the arrow, watching it arc toward the battlements. It splinters harmlessly against a reinforcing plank-hardly Olympic archery, but enough to send a warning whistle ricocheting back. You smirk. Nothing. Bonds medieval warriors like collective embarrassment by midday. The Crusaders outside the northern gate struggle to push a massive battering ram forward. Its head, carved in the form of a roaring lion's maw, creaks ominously on its chains. Some say the ram inspired Richard's famous epithet, though skeptics claim the nickname Lionheart came later. Born of poetry rather than masonry. You hang back, sipping tepid water from a goatskin flask, contemplating how a feline emblem can make a lump of oak feel more regal. Historians still argue whether Richard's personal leadership at Acre tipped the scales, or if the sheer weight of the Italian fleet delivered the final blow. A sudden shout draws your gaze. A group of Genoese sailors has hauled a siege tower into position, its boards rattling like an overfed drum. You leap forward to steady it. Hands sticky from weeks of tent pegging, and Aunt Mabel's pickled onion remedishi swears the snack wards off hunger pangs, though they mostly compete with dizziness. As you brace the tower's ladder, someone, quips that it might collapse like a glorified IKEA bookshelf, earning an eye roll that rattles your helmet chain. You grip the ladder, hoisting yourself up one rung at a time. The smell of tar and pine resin thick in your nostrils, climbing onto the wooden platform. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow, smearing a thin smear of dirt across your face as an unintended war paint. Below, soldiers lash a canvas tarp to the tower's side as protection against boiling oil, a reminder that innovation often looks a lot like patchwork duct tape. You recall a rumor that a squire once tried wrapping the tower in sheep intestines, believing the grease would neutralize fire. Whether that slime trick worked or just attracted more scavengers remains a mystery best avoided by your nostrils. At the breach's edge, melee ensues. Swords chime against steel, and the clash resonates like an out-of-tune orchestra. You heft your sword, its blade nicked from countless skirmishes, and step onto the broken wall. The defenders hurl stones and globs of tar. One sticky lump lands on your boot. And you hop on one leg before someone hurls a helmet at you. Friendly fire or foe's prank? You aren't sure. You duck under a shield bearer's arm and thrust forward, feeling the rush of adrenaline spiked, with the unshakable conviction that any moment might be your last. It smells like glory and regret all at once. Hours blur into one another until the ram finally crushes through the gate supports with a resonant crack. A cheer surges from your comrades, stirring the air like a rising tide. You dart through the gap into an alley strewn with upturned carts and shattered pottery. The scent of fresh blood mingles with jasmine garlands left by panicked townsfolk. A woman's weaving loom lies abandoned, its threads tangled like frantic prayers. You slip a single bobbin from its frame, an odd keepsake you'll trade back. Home for fresh horseshoes or a story worth telling. Inside Okar's walls, chaos reigns. You shoulder through throngs of crusaders and scavengers pulling at silk banners and jeweled chalices. A sacristan curses as a knight lifts a golden chalice, wondering if it could be worn as a decorative helmet for Sunday Mass. You stifle a laugh, recalling earlier sections when goats wore flaming shoes. The line from goat dung sunscreen to chalice helm. Cosplay feels dizzyingly coherent in this topsy-turvy tapestry. Late afternoon sun streams through a broken archway, illuminating the mosaic floor of a ruined church. You follow the light to find a chaplain blessing a chest of captured Arabic manuscripts, fragile texts rumored to contain recipes for medicinal syrups. A fringe rumor claims one scroll detailed how to brew beer from barley sprouted in saline water, though scholars scoff at the notion. You headsmake and slip the chaplain a coin to let you glimpse the scroll. The faded ink hints at forgotten knowledge. Historians still argue whether Acre's fall in July 1191 was won by sustained blockade or by the timely arrival of naval reinforcements. Under Richard's command, you squint down the narrow street, imagining those ships' oars slicing through dawn mist, steering salvation or, at least, victory into port. A weary sailor leans against a pillar, offering you a chunk of hardtack soaked in honey and vinegar, revitalizing snack that tastes of contradiction. You chew and nod, appreciating the duality. As dusk spreads its lavender glow, you climb to the top of the repaired walls to survey the city below. Lanterns flicker like fallen stars, and the waves lap gently against battered stone. You hear the distant laughter of freed captives, their chains replaced by gratitude and uncertain futures. You exhale, tasting the salt of sea and sweat mingled with relief. The bells on your belt jingle softly, echoing across the ramparts. A gentle reminder of every curious charm and dubious remedy that got you here. You rest your hand on the city gate's ancient keystone sculpted with entwined beasts that once guarded these portals, and murmur a promise to remember the faces behind this conquest. The battered defenders, the suffering civilians, the impassioned soldiers who laughed, fumbled, and fought. Beside you, whether Acre's walls felt a piety, perseverance, or plain persistence, you know the true victory lies in the stories you'll carry onward. You settle into a watchtower alcove, the cool sea breeze weaving between stones like a lullaby. You trudge down a stone quay in Venice's waning light, the lagoon's briny breath ruffling your cloak as lanterns flicker on timber-bird docks. Salt water glistens on the hulls of Venetian galleys, their prows carved like prowling lions' eyes, narrowed against incoming tides. Your boots clop on wet planks, each step echoing through archways where gulls wheel overhead, squawking like insolent heralds. You tighten your grip on your satchel, still heavy with souvenirs from Acre, and remind yourself that a new crusade awaits, though the path might twist more than Byzantine politics. The Doge's palace looms ahead, its marble facade glowing rosy in the dusk. Inside, you join a horde of knights and knight squires crammed into a massive salt-stained hall. Enrico Dandolo, Venice's blind ruler, presides over negotiations with a voice as rasping as a ship's anchor heave. You note the mainstream. Fact dating to 1202. The Fourth Crusade was meant for Egypt initially, but found itself swayed by Venetian contracts to attack Zara, Christian city on the Dalmatian coast. You stifle a groan at the irony. Trade debts outweighing the recovery of holy sites. Behind a cluster of crusaders, you spot a slender scribe who whispers of Dandolo's secret remedy for gouties said to chew boiled snail shells mixed with honey each dawn. Fringe rumor insists the shells came from the palace's very foundations, granting him strange vitality despite his blindness. You wrinkle your nose at the thought of snail grit clinging to your teeth, but can't help admitting it adds a curious flavor to the Doge's political appetite. Historians still argue whether Dandolo's maneuvering was patriotic strategy or naked avarice. A Venetian notary unfurls a contract parchment and announces the price: enough galleys to carry 20,000 crusaders, provided the crusaders can't pay their full dues. You watch knights exchange anxious glances. Many have sported debts since shipbuilders measured timbers twice and charged thrice. A wealthy count mutters that if crusading means trading Jerusalem's relics for Venetian debts, he'd rather have stayed home planting grapes. You chuckle softly, imagining the count's vineyards inundated in seawater at dawn. You trudge through mist-shrouded alleys to Zara's lined ramparts. The city's walls rise like alabaster teeth against a pale sky, and you can almost taste the defiance on the wind. Venetian galleys push their towers onto the shore, the dragonheads gleaming with fresh paint. You pull your cloak tighter, recalling how at Acre you swore you'd never again sail where water smells of fish more than faith. Yet here you are, spear tip pointed at fellow Christians. The air crackles with anticipation. Soldiers brandish lances while banners flutter, a sloppy mix of PayPal crosses and Venetian lions. Someone jokes this war's so confusing it needs a map and a glossary. A horn blast shatters the morning calm. You charge up wooden stairs lashed to the city wall, heart thudding like a behemoth's drum. Crossbow bolts whistle past and thunk into shutters, splinters scattering like confetti. You unleash your own quarrel, marveling at the soft twang of the string, soothing if you ignore the sputter of spray when your bolt strikes water below. The siege lasts 3 days, and at dusk the defenders surrender Zara in tears. You step into the gates, mud clinging to your greaves, and glimpse the townsfolk huddled in the square, their dread as palpable as the stench of spilled ale. A hail of curses springs from both sides. You duck behind a barrel of sardines to avoid friendly fire, and wonder if canned fish has ever tasted so sour after Zara falls. You join the Crusader Venetian flotilla, slicing west through the Adriatic. Salt spray mists your face while gulls swoop down to pick at breadcrumbs left on deck. You ride beside a group of Provençal knights arguing over whether Zara counts as a true act of crusading or a scandalous side quest. One insists that the Pope excommunicated the Crusaders for this assault, though others whisper that Pope Innocent III later absolved them when political winds shifted. Historians still argue whether papal complicity tarnished the crusade permanently, or if excommunication was merely a temporary censure. You shove a stale fig cake into your mouth, savoring its grainy texture and pretending you couldn't care less. Weeks later, you push into the Aegean's sapphire expanse, resting against the mast while waves lull you into half-sleep. Aegean. Sailor offers you a swig of straw-filtered wine, an odd technique meant to remove impurities, though fringe sources claim the straw once filtered through a bishop's robe to bless each barrel. You sniff it warily, but take a sip. The wine tastes of sun and salt, and something faintly ecclesiastical. You swallow, thinking medieval enology might be as tangled as the Crusades' motives. By June 1203, you sight Constantinople's domes and towers rising like opulent mirages. The city glitters with gold mosaic and gilded icons that even the sea breeze seems to hesitate before touching. You realize the Crusades' original target Egypt remains unthreatened, while a Christian superpower readies to repel you. You trudge along the Golden Horn's edge, remembering your first steps under these walls. Years ago, with Alexius's cautious blessing, Kano, you've come to breach the same gates as a conqueror, guided more by promised reward than piety. Daybreak finds you massed before Galata's fortifications. Venetian crossbowmen advance with precision, their bolts thudding into marble like morbid punctuation. Knights in Italian mail hoist, scaling ladders by moonlight, each rung slick with dew, climb heart-pounding and only pause when a bolt clangs off your helmet, odd reassurance that the brass still holds. On the ramparts, a guard hurls a molten pot of pitch that splashes around your feet like angry molten cheese. You leap back, savoring the acrid stench, and quip to the knight beside you that the Byzantines take fondue seriously. He laughs through his helmet slit. Can for a breath, you almost forget you're besieging the city that once sheltered you by midday. The Crusaders breached the land walls at a hidden sally port, reputedly left ajar by a disgruntled prince. Fringe. Rumor credits a bribe of gold-encrusted icons, but skeptics whisper about secret tunnels known only to the Genoese. You slip through the breach with your banner lifted high. Inside, the streets are a kaleidoscope of chaos. Stray dogs scurry around overturned stalls. Merchants weep over looted silks, and nobles in Byzantine garb flee toward the Golden Horn. You pass a fallen reliquary once held at the Hagia Sophia, its glass shards catching the sun like tears. At the Hippodrome, you join a mob chanting for spoils. The clang of looters' hammers mixes with panicked prayers, each strike sending vibrations through crumbling marble. A woman in furs keels over beside a cart of ivory combs, her sobs drowning out the din. You shudder at the carnage, replaying how this crusade meant to liberate Jerusalem has devoured the capital of Eastern Christendom. Historians still argue whether the Fourth Crusade's sack of Constantinople in April 1204 was a tragic betrayal of faith or an inevitable collision of politics and greed. As dusk falls on the fallen city, you wander through the palatial quarters, now stripped bare. You pick up a porcelain bowl painted with peacocks, an exquisite trophy you know will fetch a small fortune back home. You cradle it gently, feeling the glaze's cool smoothness, and wonder if parting with it will make you feel lighter or poorer. Lanterns flicker across shattered columns, and the air smells of burned incense and spilled oil. You make your way to the old patriarch's chapel, now repurposed into a makeshift storeroom. On its altar, someone has placed a simple wooden cross unlooted, untouched. You pause before it, dust swirling in the torchlight like drifting prayers. You press your fingers to the rough grain, recalling the vow that drew you eastward. In its grain, you sense the whisper of cloisters left behind and the echo of distant liturgies. Tonight, you camp within Constantinople's walls, the city's once mighty aura reduced to memories and scattered treasures. You drape your cloak over a broken column and sink to the ground, the sinew-scarred stones cold beneath you. The distant lap of waves mingles with the clang of distant looting. In the hush, you mull whether faith guided you here, or if you simply followed the glint of Venetian gold. Both motives tangle together like barbed wire around your conscience, and you wonder if history will ever unravel them into neat strands. You trudge along a dusty road north of Paris, dust kicking up with each hesitant step as you follow a ragged procession of youths singing hymns in varied, wavering voices. Their knees scrape the cobblestones, ankles naked inside worn sandals, eyes fixed on the distant shimmer of the Mediterranean's promise. The year is 1212, and word has spread like wildfire through market towns. This is the Children's Crusade, a movement of innocent zeal rather than armed knights. You balance your pack on one shoulder, half curious if you've stumbled into a lost pilgrimage, and half convinced you'll end up borrowing one of their rosaries just to join the chorus. These hopeful crusaders carry nothing heavier than wooden crosses carved from fence posts and pails meant for collecting fish or maybe miracles. They march in loose columns, leaders striding ahead with unsteady authority. Stephen of Cloyes, a teenage shepherd turned preacher, impersonates a prophet, claiming he heard angelic trumpets rallying children to liberate Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Nicholas of Cologne leads a separate German contingent, youngsters in tow like ducklings following a very enthusiastic drake. Historians still argue whether these were truly children or bands of impoverished peasants and adolescents dubbed children by chroniclers seeking a sensational tale. The air smells of sweat, baked wheat, and wildflowers crushed under too many bare feet. You swallow dust and think modern you would invest in a good pair of hiking boots. But medieval, you just hopes the soles hold up till Marseille. You step carefully around a puddle where two boys have paused to wash their feet, giggling as they squirt water over each other's robes. One boy snorts, "I bet our boots wish they had heels." And you can't help smiling because nothing bonds a multi-century traveler to teen enthusiasm like soggy footwear at roadside inns. Tavern keepers gape at the ever-growing crowd. Witness children trading crusts of stale bread for cups of cold water, their coins worth less than the clink of their tin cups. A barkeep mutters that these children believe if they sing Deus Vult loud enough, the sea will part for them as it did for the Israelites, an offbeat conviction that sparks more than one giggle in the ranks. Fringe rumor holds that some youths brought jars of salt to sprinkle on the shore, certain it would animate waves into parting lanes. You tuck your own small pouch of salt in your satchel. It's mostly to flavor tonight's stew, but you admire their optimism as you skirt the edges of villages. Villagers line the streets, offering scraps of cheese or scraps of gossip, a widow presses a crust of honeyed cake into your hand, whispering, "Taste of home," before you chase the impossible. You bite into its sticky sweetness, feeling the sugar jolt a grin across your face. You recall the goat skull helmets of Antioch and the bucket of pickled onions that saved you from scurvy. This honey cake tastes like both novelty and a reminder that miracles can be edible. The days blur in a haze of song and prayer. Every sunrise, you cross another regional boundary, Champagnes, vineyards, Burgundies, rolling hills, Provences. Lavender fields so fragrant that some crusaders tie sprigs around their necks to ward off despair. You raise an eyebrow? They look like walking potpourri sachets, but hey, if chamomile doesn't fix broken dreams, at least they smell nice. You experiment with a sprig of lavender yourself, tucking it behind your ear. Whether it soothes the heart or just draws curious bees remains a moot point when you feel yourself calm as you march. One morning on the slopes of Mont Saint-Victoire, its procession halts abruptly at the sight of a churchyard full of crosses. A group of young knights pause to pray here on an earlier crusade, and local lore says their graves glow under a full moon. A child tugs at Stephen's sleeve, asking if the saints might tip their lamps to guide the children across the sea. He nods gravely, and they kneel in silent worship knuckles, digging into gravel so hard you can almost hear the beads of prayer rattling. You crouch beside them, letting the hush deepen your own wonder. Modern you would call it a travel vlog. Worthy moment. Medieval you just calls it Tuesday, at sunset on the outskirts of Marseille. The entire host gathers on a gentle bluff overlooking the glimmering Mediterranean. Below, the port thrums with life, galleys cresting waves like playful puppies, sailors hauling nets and shouting in Provençal. You inhale the salt-tinged breeze and wonder if this sea, which carried seasoned crusaders to Acre, will deign to carry barefoot children. A curious hush falls as Stephen tells them, "Tomorrow the sea will open for us." And the children bow their heads in expectant faith. You glance at your own boots, sending a silent prayer they survive a swim in the dim glow of lanterns. You overhear salty sailors grumble that they've never seen such a strange lot. No armor, no coin, just halters of bread and dreams as big as catapults. One grizzled sea captain jokes that if angels don't rescue these children, they'll sign them up as deckhands for a month paid in stale biscuits and nightmares. The children snicker, imagining maritime life as a sort of sloshing sleepaway. Camp. That night, you sleep under a pastel sky where stars bleed together like spilled paint. You hear distant chanting grow softer as children drift into slumber, eyelids heavy with hope. You press a hand to your heart, tasting the salt of the sea and the salt of lingering doubt. Historians still argue whether most of these children ever reached the shore, whether they were sold into slavery by unscrupulous merchants or peacefully returned home once the tide never receded. The true number remains lost between the verses of ballads and the margins of official records. At dawn, you awake to an empty bluff. The children and their leaders have vanished, some say spirited away by divine wind. Others that they boarded cloaked ships and were never seen again. You trace footprints in the dew-soaked grass, following them until they dissolve into the sands. A single tin cup lies behind, its rim bent inward like a smile. If you pocket it for remembrance, if you swallow hard at the weight of unanswered questions, and the persistent echo of young voices that believed heaven's gates could be unlatched by song alone, you gaze out over the calm sea, its surface unbroken and unsplit, reflecting the morning sun like a pane of glass. You tuck your own cross beneath your tunic and whisper a promise to carry these children's faith in your steps. Whether they vanished in myth or in flesh, you clamp tighter the pouch of salt at your side, knowing some miracles are seasoned in skepticism and some in unwavering belief as you turn back toward the inland road. The sky unfurls pastel wings overhead, and you imagine those children soaring on hope's currents. You trudge away from the shore, each footfall echoing the unanswered questions the children's crusade leaves in its wake. Was this a genuine outpouring of youthful devotion? A tragic deception by opportunists, or a legend stitched together from fragments of countless dreams? You step into the rising light, determined to keep their story alive even if history never fully decides what truly happened. You trudge through slick Nile mud as dawn's pale light slants across the half-sunken siege camp at Damietta, the prize of the Fifth Crusade. In July 1218, Crusaders from Europe first set foot on these marshy banks, believing that seizing Egypt's granary would open the way to Jerusalem, an earnest strategy that ended in a precarious standstill. The air tastes of brackish river water and stale bread, and each footfall squelches with the promise of glory and the reality of exhaustion. Sermons that once thundered from pulpits have dwindled to whispered remonstrations, as if even the clergy fear these campaigns are running on empty zeal. Around you, tents collapse under their own weight, dripping canvas onto muddy grounds where rot and rust compete for supremacy. You pass a group of German knights wrestling a wagon of crossbow bolts out of the muck. Each bolt's metal head gleams like forlorn hope. A half-hearted sermon floats from a makeshift Chipola priest. So thin, he rattles like a dried scroll, urging the faithful to persevere until Damietta falls. You plaster a smile on your face, because nothing says spiritual uplift like hearing virtue in adversity from someone who looks one scorpion sting away from collapse. By mid-morning, you join a forlorn column marching toward the city walls. There are ivory battlements gleaming under smoggy skies. Mainstream armies of King Andrew II of Hungary and John of Brienne have combined forces here. But reports say more coins jingled into Muslim coffers via ransom than into Crusader purses. Balance your shield against a collapsed mangonel, its broken arms splintered like a failed handshake. You can almost taste the bitterness of empty coffers. How many horseshoes sold off to finance archers? How many silver goblets pawned just to keep the campfires burning? A fringe tidbit drifts your way. Rumor has it that the Crusader surgeon carried jars of camel urine to treat infected wounds, persuaded by local healers who swore by its antiseptic sting. You wrinkle your nose, imagining bandages soaked in cud-laced fluid, and wonder whether you'd rather face a swarming mob of mosquitoes than that pungent remedy. Historians still argue whether such folk cures did more harm than good, or if desperation simply elevated every oddity into a medical breakthrough. At midday, the sun broils you like a spit-roasted fowl. You duck beneath the shadow of a tattered pavilion, where a monk offers you a sip of holy cordial distilled from desert dates and honey. Sweetness jolts your tongue awake, a brief reprieve from the temps of sweat and swill. You ask the monk if this concoction truly wards off dysentery, or if it's just flavored liquored hope. He winks and admits it's a monastery-made brandy repurposed for battlefield morale. You grin, because admitting the truth helps more than 1,000 prayers in these half-hearted crusades as afternoon lumbers toward dusk. You trudge along a narrow canal that channels the Nile's overflow into the camp. The water surface ripples with floating debris, broken spears, sun-bleached bones of pack mules, and fragments of prayer beads. You wade knee-deep to cross, grateful for ankle protection, but aware that leeches drift like hungry memories. Beneath the murk, a young squire behind you yelps, brushing a leech off his shin, then curses the devil for inventing small creatures with big appetites. You pat him on the back, joking that if leeches had been God's true judges, none of you would still be standing near the city walls. Siege towers rise like rotting sentinels, their wheels gouging trenches into clay. Engineers carve openings in wooden planks to flush out defenders. But each innovation seems met with another trick from Saladin's lieutenants. You hear a rumor that the Egyptian engineers coated their archers' armor in crocodile fat to deflect arrows, on unverified tale that earns rolled eyes from cynical veterans. You shift your weight, telling yourself that for every rumor of miraculous defense, there's an equal chance it's just another campfire yarn by twilight. Catapults hurl rocks that splintered the city's gates, the crashes echoing off mud walls like angry titans at play. You clutch a hastily painted cross on your breastplate, its edges frayed from repeated washings and whispered confessions. A veteran next to you mutters that this is less a crusade and more a medieval game of whack-a-mole. You grin at his sarcasm because sarcasm is the only thing that's refused to desert you. Night descends swiftly, and the camp transforms into a forest of flickering lamps. You wander toward a communal fire, drawn by the clatter of small wooden dice spilling across a crate. A handful of crusaders play a dice game called Judgment of Jerusalem, betting small coins on who will outlast the night without succumbing to fever. You scoop up a handful of dice, toss them on the crate, and watch as they tumble, a microcosm of these crusades, where chance often outweighs courage. You let out a soft chuckle as a die lands on its edge, balancing improbably. Someone declares, "It is a sign the crusade can yet succeed." Someone else shouts that it's proof of divine indifference. Historians still argue whether fate or folly shaped the outcome at Damietta. You drift away from the dice game, drawn instead to a dusty minstrel. Slumped against a crate, with a cracked voice, he plays a lament on a lute strung with gut his lyrics, weaving tales of past glories and present despair. A fringe rumor claims he once performed at the papal court for Innocent III, who rewarded him with a piece of the Preci send, strung, with Lacati strung with Preci strugs, weaving days, with burrs, with legies. The fine move of all my legi, my sensual assays, a rise rise, a stage lessees, we sem with YK, we summony, we sem descend, I semmed it, we semmed, we sem it, I say it to us, we sem it to you, I be now, we say you some with us, I see you at use, I use you to me, I we you to see, I you to you, I see, I see you, sent it to me, unites McDisty to see, True cross. Now he adorns his lute with a chipped bone he swears belongs to that relic. You listen, the melody tugging your chest between pride and regret. You drop a few coins into his battered hat. Thinking art deserves reward, even in a faltering expedition, the night deepens. And you wander past rows of makeshift graves marked by broken shields and splintered crosses. Lantern light casts long shadows across shallow pits filled with earth and sighs. You kneel before one grave, pressing your hand to the cool soil, whispering a prayer for a comrade who died of fever far from home. The wind rustles through reeds lining the canal, sounding like distant choristers chanting vespers in an empty basilica. Suddenly, drums roll from the command tent. News that King Andrew's hoped for reinforcements have been delayed. Food supplies dwindle, and desert floods threaten to sweep away siege works. You long for the certainty of home, the stable roofs of your village, the smell of bread rising in ovens, the simple warmth of a hearth fire. Yet you remain tethered by vows you made before God and communal peer pressure that won't let you walk away. As pre-dawn light seeps over the camp, you trudge back to your sleeping quarters single crate, draped with a threadbare blanket. You settle onto the makeshift cat, body aching from another day of half-hearted thrusts at Damietta's gates. You dream of a faraway shore where rivers run clear and cooks serve stew without the aftertaste of desperation. You wake to a cry for dawn masses, crude trumpets calling you to another. Ritual so perfunctory, you half expect the priest to forget his lines. You rise and step into the flickering glow of lanterns. The horizon sags under a leaden sky, and you sense this crusade is quietly unwinding like a well-worn tapestry. You gather your cloak, tighten your belt, and step over splintered planks, resolved to see this to its end, if only to silence the whispers that you fled when it grew too weary to fight. You clutch your worn cross and whisper to the Nile mud beneath your boots. May this dust bear witness to our resolve, even if Egypt's sands choke our ambitions. Dawn barely peeks over the Nile's overflow, staining the sky with bruised shades of purple and gray. You tug your cloak tighter, cold seeping through your gambeson, and head toward the makeshift chapel where the priest is already droning the morning liturgy. Torch smoke curls around broken beams, lending the whole scene a haze of penitence and fatigue. After Mass, you join the groaning line of soldiers at the water trough. Ceramic jugs clink as you fill yours, the Nile's brackish. Taste a bitter reminder that every drop here carries the weight of home. A burly crossbowman ahead of you cracks a joke about trading the river for wine, earning only a hollow laugh from the man behind him. Word ripples through the camp that John of Brienne sent a fresh courier last night. Pearls of hope wrapped in a leather scroll. You hurry toward the command tent, where a knot of knights and clerics pore over the message by lantern light. They whisper that reinforcements may arrive in 3 days, yet none dare believe until dusty sails crest the horizon. Rations are issued next, stale barley cakes and watered-down ale. You nibble at yours, spotting small pebbles that clatter under your teeth. You spit one out, pressing the others back into your pouch for the pigs that roam the outskirts. The cook curses under his breath. The miller's fine words about divine providence won't grind more flour until someone pays up. By mid-morning, the camp stirs to alarm. From a ramshackle tower, you glimpse Muslim archers lifting composite bows, their arrows zigzagging toward your lines. You raise your shield and plunge into the shield wall, the thunder of bolts pelting wood and steel like a relentless storm. A cry goes up as a bolt thuds into a comrade's thigh. He collapses, blood seeping through linen and mail. A sergeant bellows for volunteers to repair the siege engines. You step forward, heart pounding with a mix of dread and adrenaline. Climbing the ladder of a mangonel, you feel its spoiled timbers groan under your weight. Below, the river's current laps at the wheels, threatening to swallow them whole. High above the mud, you fit fresh planks into the broken arm. Each hammer strike sends splinters flying, and you catch a glimpse of a fallen banner snagged on a mangled beam, its crimson cross, a tattered relic of earlier zeal. You patch the wood as best you can, thinking of home planks that never warp, never rot in the sun. At midday, the enemy launches a sally. You disconnect from the engine and sprint for the walls, shield overhead, sword in hand. Mud clings to your greaves, weighing each step like a leaden promise. Beyond the rampart, you face a phalanx of spearmen. Their leader raises a curved sword, and for a moment the world narrows to the edge of his blade. The clash is brief but brutal. You parry, he thrusts. Your arms burn. You drive him back with a cry born of every prayer you forgot to say. He falls. You stand panting, blood and sweat mingling on your brow. Round you, both sides retreat, no glory won, only survival earned, as dusk drapes the camp in violet shadows. Trumpets call the muster. You limp toward the communal fire, joints aching, clothes muddied. A monk passes out bowls of thin gruel sweetened with date syrup. You sip slowly, letting warmth seep in. Someone beside you hums a psalm tentative off-key, but enough to stitch a frayed spirit. That night, you crawl into your blanket-draped crate. Overhead, a distant hammer taps against wood, a sentinel, repairing what tomorrow will break again. You close your eyes and dream of clear rivers, steady ovens, and a roof that doesn't leak. And just before sleep claims you. You hear the captain whisper orders for a dawn assault you fear you cannot sustain. Your hand drifts to the frayed cross at your breastplate, as if the worn leather strap alone could anchor your resolve. The Nile's Mud is already calling you back, each grain reminding you why you came and why you must stay even if victory here means losing more than you ever bargained to find. Before dawn's gray hush breaks, you wake to a chorus of distant croaking frogs and the faint drip of water seeping through the pavilion's canvas. Last night's rain has turned the camp into a network of ankle-deep streams. You shimmy out of your threadbare blanket, slip into muddied boots, and trudge toward the command tent. Each step a soft slap against rivulets filled with muddy straw and discarded loaf crusts. Inside the tent, flickering lanterns reveal anxious faces bent over a crudely drawn map. The Nile's overflow has breached the northern works, flooding ditches and softening earth around siege towers. Engineers are already debating whether to reinforce the embankments with sandbags or abandon that approach in favor of a floating assault raft. You lean in, tracing the water's path on the parchment, wondering if wood and rope can truly hold back a river. A courier from the Hungarian camp arrives, breath misting in the lamplight. He brings word that a small fleet of Venetian galleys is approaching if they haven't been swallowed by the Nile's swollen currents. The knights exchange hopeful nods, but you recall how rumors once promised reinforcements at Acre that never materialized. You pat the courier's shoulder with an encouraging grunt, masking your own skepticism. By first light, you join a group tasked with building the raft. You haul logs from a half-submerged timber pile, splinters biting into your calloused palms. A monk nearby chants psalms over soaked ropes, as though divine blessing can turn wet hemp into unbreakable bonds. You snap the monk a wry smile. Faith is the strongest mortar in these makeshift works. But you'd rather see sturdy nails. Mid-morning heat ripples over the waterlogged grounds. You wipe sweat and rain from your brow, careful not to smear the fresh cross you've painted on your sleeve. A squire offers you a small flask of mulled wine, its warmth fighting off chills from dawn's damp. You take a grateful sip, wondering how many more days of soaked tents you can endure before the camp becomes a permanent marsh dot across the flooded plain. You glimpse the ragged silhouette of Damietta's battlements. Mud brick towers loom like broken teeth above the water. The city's defenders are already setting fire to floating rafts of their own, sending them drifting toward your works in hopes of snapping ropes and soaking timber. Black smoke coils across the water, and you duck beneath a hastily erected awning to avoid ash falling on your helmet. At midday, the Venetians finally arrive, their galley prows cutting through the murk like silver knives. A cheer goes up, brief and shaky, as rowers haul boats into place beside the assembled rafts. You scrub a grin across your face. There's something galvanizing about fresh faces, even if they talk in a tongue you barely understand. That afternoon, the assault raft is ready. You scramble aboard with a mix of dread and resolve, shield in hand and the monk's latest blessing still ringing in your ears. As the raft drifts toward the walls, you feel every plank shudder under wavelets and the weight of dozens of armed men. The defenders lurch forward, hurling javelins that clang against armor and splinter the deck. A shout from your side. One of the Venetians has lost his footing and plunged into the oily water. You dive after him, hauling him back aboard amidst curses in his language and gratitude in his eyes, pulling yourself back up. You see the enemy's catapult cocked to hurl a flaming ball. You nudge the man next to you and brace for impact as the fireball shrieks toward the raft. It strikes with a cry of splintering wood, hurling men and oaths into the swell. You manage to clamp your shield overhead, feeling the shockwave in your arms. Steam rises where the boards burned. By evening, the raft is battered but still afloat. You disembark onto soaked ground and collapse against a half-submerged log, hands still trembling. A sergeant hands you a piece of jerky hard as a hoof, and about as flavorful, but you chew gratefully, savoring its dryness more than its taste. as twilight falls. The camp's lamps reflect off the inundated plain, turning water into liquid gold. You wander toward a cluster of knights playing a crude board game carved on driftwood. They beckon you over and deal you to tumbled pebbles, declaring them markers for your campaign fortune. You place a pebble on the victory square, though every fiber of your being knows that tomorrow may bring retreat as easily as triumph. Night deepens. You slip away from dice and laughter, seeking solitude beside the canal. You kneel at the water's edge and let your hand trail beneath the surface, feeling the gentle pull of current. You whisper a prayer less for victory than for clarity. The Nile doesn't care for crusader vows or PayPal decrees. It follows its own course, indifferent to human ambition. You stand and dust mud from your gambeson. In the lantern glow, your reflection warps in Ripple's helmeted face, grim beneath dried tears of rain, eyes steadied by resolve. Tomorrow, you'll strap on your sword and shield again. You'll hurl yourself at Damietta's walls with battered siege engines and battered faith. You'll carry on because, like the Nile, you must keep moving, even when the world around you is flooded with doubt.